The global economy is going through a challenging time. With a spike in global conflicts and concerns over rising inflation, the post-pandemic recovery is increasingly looking challenging. So how can countries around the world press the reset button and put their economies back on the growth track? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Mr. Borge Brende. He's the president of the World Economic Forum. Mr. Brende, welcome to First Post and thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're living in a world with two major wars and multiple other conflicts and deepening divisions. First of all, what impact do you see on the global economy in the year ahead?
So the global economy is doing much better than we expected. So we were afraid that we're going to be faced with a recession this year, and we do now expect the global economy to then grow more than 3%. What we are faced with instead is kind of a global geopolitical recession, and we do hope that those conflicts that you were mentioning, Ukraine, Gaza conflict, doesn't then escalate in a way where they will also have severe negative impact on trade and growth.
How do you think India is faring in this larger global environment, and what is your assessment of India's growth story and trajectory?
So India is also an economy that, of course, relies on other countries and the global situation. But since growth is back, even if it's lower than trend growth in the last 3 decades, trend growth was close to 4%. Now we're a little bit more than 3%. India is doing incredibly well. I have to say that India is the fastest growing of the large economies in the world. If India continues with its reforms, I think India in the coming decade can become a $10 trillion economy. And what does that mean? It means that India will be the 3rd largest economy in the world, and it means that more people get opportunities for jobs and a better livelihood. We should not forget that India has, due to this growth that we have also seen the last years, eradicated poverty at an impressive scale. 400 million people has been lifted out of extreme poverty. This has only been seen in China at that pace in the past.
And India is a democracy, so with all the compulsions or the trappings of a democracy, to be able to achieve this is interesting. And this 10 trillion figure is something that you have mentioned in the past as well. You've said that India is on track to becoming a $10 trillion economy in the coming years. What is the X factor that you see in the Indian economic landscape? Why is it able to buck the global trend of slowdowns? Is it the policy decisions? Is it larger geopolitical forces? Or is it a combination of the two?
All the above, I would say. The reforms have been important. We're seeing that infrastructure is changing very fast in India, hundreds of new airports. We're also seeing trains and roads. We are also seeing that the Indian economy is opening up, more open to foreign direct investments, more level playing field. Of course, also India has benefited from this diversification of value chains. Many countries say they cannot have just 80–90% of products being manufactured in one country. And you also have this so-called friendshoring that India is benefiting from, especially, I think, the largest economy in the world, the US, also are now increasing manufacturing coming from India. Just look at Apple. There's not a lot of Apple iPhones produced in India just a few years ago, and now it's like 25% of their production. And I would also add that we're seeing stronger growth in services and the digital economy than the traditional manufacturing. And India is stronger on services and digital. So also the fact that India has quite digitally literate population, especially the young, is working in its interest. And also, of course, this digital ID was important in this broader context.
So from a policy perspective, what would your prescription for New Delhi be? More of the same?
More of the same. I would also make sure that the revenues that will come from a growth of 8% are invested in areas where it further increases India's competitiveness in the future. I already mentioned infrastructure. There is a way to go on the roads and airports and also in the maritime sector in the ports. But for me, maybe the most important thing is education. India is fortunate to have part of its population also able then to handle several languages, including English. But we will need to see in the years to come that every child in India has access to schools where they will learn basic maths, read, write. This is an area for investments, and I think this will be coming. I think red tape, get rid of red tape, unnecessary bureaucracy. I think also good governance is important. Continue the reforms to also eradicate corruption will be important.
Right. Final question on India, and I'm going to quote from World Economic Forum's founder and executive chairman, Klaus Schwab. He said, India is promoting a just and equitable growth for all in the world during its G20 presidency, while also making significant progress on the most pressing domestic challenges. India's G20 presidency comes at a crucial time. Prime Minister Modi's leadership is critical in this fractured world. Do you agree?
I think it was very well said from our founder and chairman, Professor Klaus Schwab. India's G20 presidency showed that India is also capable of bringing different players together and agree on steps forward. I think the diplomatic role and importance of India is also growing because there is correlation between this and the economy. So this is, in many ways, India's century, as I've been saying also before, is Asia's century, but that is also underpinned now with exceptional growth and development in India. And now it's up to India to continue this path of growth, investment, and also prosperity.
The other big player in Asia and the other growth engine in the world, of course, is China. It is going through a tough time. Every expert has their own take on what is ailing China. What would you say is the reason China's economy is struggling to gain momentum?
It's true that China in the past used to have growth numbers like India is seeing now, even higher. For some years, they were close to 10% growth, and they were at 8%. We do, though, expect that China will grow close to 5% this year. And being then such a large economy already, the second largest economy in the world, together with the US, they're almost 40% of the global economy. 5% is not bad. So I think that China is in a situation where they will have to then continue with reforms. They will need to pivot from growth and investment in real estate and also infrastructure into areas where will increase their competitiveness for production higher up in the value chain. They also will have to implement new technologies like generative AI very fast because their workforce is for the first time shrinking. So some back offices also have to then be done by the new technologies. Also, what is a fact is that China is the largest manufacturer in the world. And post-COVID and during COVID, we saw quite a good demand for traditional goods. But now we're seeing that the demand is increasing in services and also digital trade. So China will need to pivot more into these areas. And China also has a huge opportunity with a big home market with 1.4 billion people. And I think they're also reflecting on how then to increase the demand in their own market, their home market. I think that will be important.
It's interesting that you mentioned AI because there's a lot of apprehension of what AI brings to the table. We do know that some jobs are being taken over, they're being automated, and the job market is going to look significantly different in the next couple of decades. How do you foresee the overall impact of AI on economies, and what do you think the job market will look like going forward?
It is, of course, a mixed picture. That's always been the situation when there are new technologies that are so consequential, that are really out there. We saw it with electricity, we saw it with the internet. You know, in the country where I'm based now, in Switzerland, 90% of the population used to work in the agriculture sector. And now it's 3%, and they're producing more food than they did back when 90% was in the agriculture sector. And you could say, where did all those farmers go? Of course, they are working in different sectors now, higher up in the value chain that can also pay higher salaries. So it's increasing also the welfare. So what will happen with the AI is, of course, some of the jobs can now be replaced by artificial intelligence, back offices and all that. But those jobs, the people that having those jobs should then do jobs that can increase productivity further. Productivity is a core of prosperity. So AI can increase productivity with as much as 30% in the coming years or the coming decade. But we also then need to upskill and reskill people that are losing their jobs to move into other areas where they can be paid better. That is like the history of the whole industrial revolution. With AI, though, and that is a big caveat, there is also areas of concerns related to the fact that it's unregulated. There's no traffic rules on AI, and AI should not take the control of human beings. It should work in the interest of humankind. So if you get algorithms that spin out of control, if you get autonomous weapons, robots, and etc., that where humans are not in control, that's quite a scary picture. So the fragmented world is unfortunately leading to a situation where there's less likely that we can agree on those traffic rules, and that's a big concern.
In the beginning of our conversation, you spoke about the risk of a geopolitical recession. Now we've seen the US pass another aid bill. They are going to give more money to Ukraine to fight the war. Some of that money will also go to Israel. So the wars look like they're unending. Do you think that commerce can play a role here? Do you think that if we tie the economic fortunes of some of these players, it will mitigate the risk of future conflict?
I always believe that trade and also interactions reduces the risks of war. Look at Europe, where all the two First World Wars started between European countries, Germany, France, UK, and also back then the Soviet Union. So the single market has led to a situation, at least, where the core European countries now are very deeply allied. So I hope that we can continue to trade and integrate more. That's not really the case today, though. So the wars have to end. So hopefully there will be a solution to the situation in Gaza soon, and also there will be an end to the war in Ukraine. But what we're all worried about is the escalation. We were very close to an escalation between Iran and Israel that could have led to a full-fledged conflict in the Middle East. With the impact would have been terrible. You could have seen oil prices of $150 US per barrel, and that would mean that the global economy would be in a very fragile situation, and it could kill the growth that we are seeing now. The growth is not strong, but it's there. What we have to avoid is a decade of tepid growth, low growth. So we have to avoid to repeat the 70s. And the geopolitics is probably now the biggest threat, in addition to the debt. We haven't seen this kind of debt level globally since the Napoleonic Wars, and that's a long time ago. So we really, really need to also be able to use growth to also reduce debt.
In fact, global agencies like the IMF and the World Bank have also been raising the concerns over rising levels of debt, especially in the developing world. What sort of risk do you think this unsustainable debt poses to the global economy?
It's a risk also for the banks. We saw in the big financial crisis that solid banks is very important. The funding of the banks globally is better than back then. We don't have this subprime situation, but the debt situation now has to be handled. But the problem is that when the growth is pretty low, to go into an austerity situation now would also not be a good thing, because we still have to support growth. But the interest rates are also high because of the inflationary pressure that is there. And the inflationary pressure is also partly a result of global value chains, and where we see that you're not necessarily now buying the products where it's cheapest. You also factor in other factors, and you also have the situation now with the Panama Canal, the situation with the Suez Canal that adds then to this. But we will need in the coming decade to really, really work on how to reduce unsustainable debt, and hopefully when the inflation gets lower, the cost of this debt will also go down. But a lot of this debt was taken and committed in a situation where there was zero interest. And when you now have 4% interest, interest rates has now become the largest budget cost in many developing countries. And this is very worrisome. These money should have been invested then in school, education, and health and infrastructure instead.
This year's Davos summit was themed Rebuilding Trust. Do you think people have lost faith in their leaders and governments, especially after the pandemic? And if that is the case, how can that trust be regained?
So I think it's a nuanced picture. We did come through the COVID pandemic in a way where we saw that through global cooperation, we were able to develop a vaccine and a new kind of vaccine very fast. That shows the strength of the technology. But of course, many developing countries were in a different situation. And I think a bit of the schisma between North and South was also due to this unfair distribution of vaccines. But moving forward, I do think that we will have to then rebuild trust, and we also have to see that we can achieve so much more if we work together and not compete. But I think we are between orders. We had one order passed, like the post-Cold War order. We don't know what the new order will be, but hopefully it will be built on the UN Charter and some important principles. But in a situation between orders, there's always competition and unruly period. So we have to make sure that in areas that are critical for humankind, we still can collaborate. Look at climate change, the heating of our planet. Look at cyber space and cyber crime. It's cost us now 2 to 3 trillion a year. That's a lot of money. We also see it on AI regulation. So hopefully, and what we saw in Davos, that we brought people from different camps together and said, even in the fragmented world, we will have to find areas where we have to agree, because we are really in the same boat and we have no planet B. You just have this planet.
It's interesting you say this, because the relevance of Davos has been questioned in recent times, and critics call it an expensive gateway for the world's most powerful. How do you propose to combat this perception and make it more people-centric?
I, of course, don't agree with that perception. We had a very successful Davos, and it is, in my view, the most the international meeting with the most diverse group. We have civil society, we have social entrepreneurs, we have young global leaders, we have business and governments together. And I think with the complexities of the challenges we are faced with, we have to do it in a multi-stakeholder way. It can't only be governments then discussing a text or business. And I think the World Economic Forum is an impartial, neutral organization that also brings US, China, India, Europe together. And we saw in Davos that we had 50 concrete outcomes. We had alliances coming together. What people then can say, oh, this is the elite. No, it's not the elite, but it is the elected leaders of the world. It's the CEOs that head the big companies. And then there's the leaders of a lot of civil society. You can say that the leaders come together, and some people then say it's the elite. No, these are very important decision makers that we will need to have to work better together, more together, to secure what I just mentioned, our planet, because we don't have planet B. We have this planet A, and we have a lot of challenges that we have to deal with together.
And the World Economic Forum says that transitioning to a sustainable carbon neutral future would take $13.5 trillion in investment globally. Where do you see this money coming from? Do you think wealthier nations can be forced to open their checkbook?
I would say that the problem with climate change is that we too frequently then focus on the cost of action. But the fact is that the cost of inaction today far exceeds the cost of action, because we are seeing now many places on our planet water scarcity, terrible weather situations, droughts, and the heat that is killing not only animals but also people. So we really now need to invest. And it is true that we probably, to reach net zero by 2050, we will need to invest around $2 trillion a year. That is 2 to 3%, or it's less than 2% of the global GDP. And to invest less than 2% of the global GDP in the future of our planet and in livelihood, I think is not a lot. And that investment can also create a lot of growth and new jobs. Look at solar and wind. 10 years ago, solar was 10 times as expensive as today. Today, you can roll out solar panels many places in the world, and it's competitive. It's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than oil, it's cheaper than gas, and it doesn't emit CO2 at all. So it doesn't come with a negative piece. But of course, we can't change our energy delivery overnight. The whole industrial revolution was based on a fossil fuel situation, so we now have to pivot, and that means that we have to invest. We have to also focus on energy security, energy access, but this has to be decoupled from growth in CO2 emissions in the future if you don't want a planet that is on fire.
That's the diplomat in you speaking. You've not answered my question. Who's going to pay for this action? I understand that the cost of inaction is higher, but someone will have to bear the cost of this action. And I think that's where the world is divided.
Yes. So now I'm glad you followed up. As I said, $2 trillion is not that much money. It is if you look at what we spend on defense, it's very little. So I think we also have to pivot the global development assistance much more in this field. And global development assistance is hundreds of billions. We also have to start to get the private sector on board. This can not only be solved by governments alone, because as we mentioned earlier, governments are also indebted. But companies should then be incentivized to also invest more in decarbonization. And there are different ways of doing it. Today, you can emit whatever you want in many countries, and it's even subsidized. by their governments. We do have to make sure that if you invest in renewable solutions and you decouple growth from growth in CO2, there has to be incentives. And look at the US, though, invested now $1 trillion in the so-called IRA, this Inflationary Reductionary Act. That shows that nations are taking this more seriously. In Dubai at COP28, we reached also the $100 billion in yearly investments in developing countries. We also have been able to now establish the fund for loss and damage. But we're not there yet. But count on the World Economic Forum. We will use every opportunity to push for more investments. But we're also arguing that investments, the $2 trillion you need annually, that is possible, is not the cost. It is an investment in the future.
You recently also talked about globalization, that is a slowdown in global trade. What do you think are the major factors causing this, and how big a role do you think politics plays here?
So we're very worried about the fact that trade is growing much slower than it used to do in the past. For 3 decades, trade was the engine behind growth. So trade grew much faster than the global GDP. Today, trade is growing around 3%, and the global GDP is growing at like 3.1, 3.2. If this continues and there is more protectionism, we can see that we might end up in a situation where we have overall lower growth for a decade. So we will need to also increase trade moving forward. We have to avoid new protectionary measures. We also have to follow what we have done in the past, that it is really about competitive advantages. If you are good at producing something, you should do that, and you should buy from them, and others are good at producing other things. This is also the success factor behind globalization. And look, we doubled the global GDP in then 30 years, and we eradicated poverty like we've never seen due to this. But of course, globalization also has to be reinvented. So I would say re-globalization is a lot better than slow globalization. Re-globalization is building on the successes, but of course, we also have to adjust. We can't, we have to have better and more resilient than global value chains. We had this policy of just in time, but we also have to factor in just in case. But that will also, of course, lead to higher prices of the products. So we have to be careful so the pendulum doesn't go from one side to the other and kill growth. So I hope that we don't end up in like beggar thy neighbor situation, but more like continue to prosper the neighbor. And if you do that, it's also going to prosper you.
Very well said. So we face a risk of geopolitical recession. Debt is our biggest challenge. India should stay the course vis-a-vis reforms. And on climate change, the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action. Mr. Borge Brende, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.